Since creation almost exactly 6,000 years ago, God established His design for human civilization. Regardless of the evil wokeness of modern America, God made man in the image of God. And man, as designed by God, was in two parts, male and female. So mankind is not male kind, but male and female kind, without which humankind would become extinct. This divine unity was created and established by God with a perfect oneness, not to be duplicated by any other variation or demonic subversion. But God's design was accompanied by God's purpose. And that was that male and female, made in the image of God, would multiply and bear children. These children would then grow to age where the male would choose a female wife, with the man leaving his father and mother, and together, this new man and woman becoming one would create a new family and bear children. Well, hello and welcome to Stand in the Gap. Today, Isaac and I are going to begin a new two-part series on the theme of restoring parental autonomy in education, and complete a three-part emphasis on Christian education in America and the rise of homeschooling and Christian education in America. You know, parents are the foundation for education. And we're going to focus on that theme this week and next. Now, in God's plan, the man and woman were to teach their children the plan of God, the ways of God, and the will of God, and then teach their children to teach their children the same. Yet from the beginning, some humans, like Satan himself, led by him, they rebelled against the Creator God of heaven. They rejected God's plan for family and began to arrogantly subvert God's plan for human sexuality. And violating God's divine design for male and female and family, they subverted God's design for children, even killing them in the womb or sacrificing them to idols. They subverted God's content of instruction of those children to, instead of learning to live in the fear of God, actually taught their children to love rebellion in the ways of death. Hence, these civilizations became evil and lawless, forcing God in His justice to step in. Yet, in the midst of this rebellion, people with a fear of God chose and choose to resist the evil pressures by evil government and evil rulers to usurp and indoctrinate their children, and instead to raise up their children as commanded by God in the fear and the admonition of the Lord. Hence, so it is today in America and the West generally, where due to the wake-up call of COVID tyranny and the sprint to Antichrist global government, we have witnessed a resurgence in Christian education and homeschooling, where parents have been awakened to the ambitions of an evil society. Now, one organization and leader who has sought to empower parents to take control of their children's education and resist the governmental pressure to replace parents is the United States Parents Involved in Education, USPI, as it's referred to, and its founder and president, Sheri Few. And with that introduction, Sheri, I'd like to welcome you to the program today. We are really honored to have you here, Isaac and I, on this program today.
Well, thank you, Sam. I'm honored to be here. I'm really excited about this opportunity.
Well, you've been in this space for a long time, and I'd like you to share just briefly to get us going, since you are the founder and the president, what was it that primarily motivated you to start this organization? And perhaps this question as well. Why is it so important that parents understand their foundational role in the education of their children?
Well, we started out as South Carolina Parents Involved in Education in the state where I live. And I got involved because my children were in the government schools, and I was very concerned about what I was seeing in their curriculum. And so in 2010, we led the fight in our state against the Common Core standards. And we lost that battle, just like many people around the country, like myself, had the same experience in fighting the Common Core standards. So when we were unsuccessful with that, these other leaders and myself from around the country collaborated and formed United States Parents Involved in Education. And our mission is to close the U.S. Department of Education and end all federal education mandates, because we understood that this is where the majority of nefarious pedagogy originates and is incentivized with federal funding. So that's how we got started about 7 years ago as a national organization.
And I commend you, Sheri, for that. I know that when I was in the Pennsylvania House years ago, involved in education, that the individuals that I found that were most aggressive and helpful in a positive way in fighting for the education of the children were moms just like you. And I find that very interesting, and that's how you got involved, and I'm so glad that you did. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us, because when we come back, we're going to enter in now to this discussion more broadly of not just the mission of USPI, but the whole involvement of parents and involvement and things I think you will want to see and hear.
Truth, flexible or permanent? The Bible, ancient history, or powerfully relevant? Culture, a reflection of enlightenment or warning signs? The pastor, commentator, or frontline combatant? Every day, American Pastors Network speaks to these questions where and when they matter. With hundreds of affiliate radio stations nationwide, a website and mobile app screening today's headlines through the twin lenses of the Bible and the Constitution, educating, informing, equipping. This is the American Pastors Network. The time is now to stand in the gap for truth.
Well, Sheri, again, we're so excited to have you on this program. And as Sam already kind of laid out the biblical underpinnings for parental authority, it sounds funny that we have to say that, but that parents have authority over their children and autonomy over their education. I really appreciate that as a father who's involved homeschooling our children, and I've been a public school teacher. I know how important it is for all children to have their parents involved. In fact, we would oftentimes have IEP, individualized educational plans, and I think each parent needs to have that with their children, figuring out how to use, whether it's homeschool or going to a school, that's a tool for you as a parent. Maybe church, youth group, or whatever. All of those are tools for parents, but you as the parent, you have that autonomy. You ultimately have that responsibility with your kids. So with what you're doing with USPI, it's so important. What do you find are some of the biggest impediments, some of the biggest obstacles, or maybe the biggest obstacle, whether it be a law or an agency or something like that, that stops parents from taking the autonomy that they ought to take?
Well, I think that our society has accepted and been involved so long with this idea of sending their children to government schools. When my children now are in their mid-30s, so when they were in government schools, I met a person who was homeschooling, and back then it was kind of rare, and I thought, oh, she must be really smart, she's homeschooling her kids, because we're all kind of under this concept that you have to have some big degree and know a lot about every subject in order to homeschool your children. So I think that's part of it. It's just a societal norm. And there was a lot of trust. Parents have trusted for decades that the government schools had the best interest of their children at heart. But we're seeing, and it began, as I stated, a few decades ago for me when I began seeing the problems, and they weren't as blatant as they are today. But so it's that, and then there's the idea of two parents both needing to work. So most families think that, we have to have the two incomes. So how in the world can I homeschool? How can I afford an alternative for a private school? So they're kind of stuck in those ruts. And I think they're just hopeful at best, that things are going to work out for their children and somehow they can counter the nonsense that's being taught.
You know, what you're describing there really hits home with me personally as a millennial parent. The largest generation is millennial generation, the generation that has the most parents right now, the millennials, and that's what they're going through. And, you know, for a lot of them, they're just trying to bring in enough money to make ends meet. And like you said, they're just hopeful. They just kind of cross your fingers and hope, oh, I hope this all works out. And we can't do that, not especially biblically. We need to use what God has given us, to be stewards of what God has given us. And there's nothing given to us more precious than our children. What is the best response that you have found that parents can respond when they get these pressures from the outside, these societal norms? Sometimes it's family members saying, oh, you got to do this because your kids are not going to turn out right if you don't. Or just well, that's just what it's been done. This has been done for generations. Your kids line up, this little yellow school bus comes by, they pick them up, they go to this place. You know, that's just what we've done. That's American. How do people respond to that when they start to understand their role and the autonomy they have as a parent?
Well, Christian parents especially need to understand, as Sam so well articulated in the beginning of the show, their responsibility for their children. It is solely their responsibility to educate their children, or at least to direct the education of their children. And not only is it biblically foundational, but the United States Supreme Court has also held that parents have the authority to direct the upbringing and the education of their children. So parents need to act on their rights. They have rights. You know, we hear a lot of talk about parental rights and protecting parental rights. Well, parental rights are fundamental, and they are given by God. And so all of our rights come from God. And so we need to act on those rights as parents and recognize that even though we think it might be a financial struggle, you know, we're going to have to make some sacrifices and trust God to provide. I mean, God is our provider. And believe me, God is not looking fondly upon what's being taught in government schools. And I don't believe, from everything that I've learned in my experiences, that God would want parents to leave their children in the government schools. So they have to trust God and expect that He will provide, make a few sacrifices. And there are some policy ideas that we can talk about too that can help families to be able to afford, you know, an alternative to the government schools.
And Sheri, you have one of the things that you've done in trying to educate, because I mean, we're talking education of our children. What we're doing right now is trying to educate parents. And part of that is to cut through the deception, or as Isaac suggested, the peer pressure. Peer pressure is extraordinarily strong. I know when my wife and I first began to homeschool our children a long time ago, our oldest son is 43, so we were on the front edge of that. It was a big step. It was a big step. But we ultimately ended up coming down and making a determination based on what we've already talked about. What did God say? And I'm not going to, I can't blame the way my children turn out on my neighbor or somebody down the road, you know, if I've done nothing. So in any regard, you've taken and put together a documentary, which I like to show just a little bit of you have a little bit of a trailer. It's on your website, uspie.org. But you put together a documentary that you've entitled Truth and Lies in American Education. I think it's a catchy title, but it's also a true title. So if you don't mind, let's just watch that right now for a little bit, and then I want to come back and ask you a few questions about it.
Your average run-of-the-mill American has no idea that the UN has any influence in the classroom.
Hey, how's it going?
Good to meet you.
Good to meet you too. I brought my book too, if you would sign it.
I'd be very happy to, absolutely.
I honestly didn't believe half of what I read in that book until I went and fact-checked it myself.
So much of the education policy that has now completely infected our public school system is coming from Washington, D.C., and beyond that, from the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization.
What's your goal? What do you want for your child? Because the school's goal is different than what your goal is. The institution of school forms a wedge between the child and the parent. You might ask, how? Child comes home, Daddy, I don't understand this. Can you help me? The dad says, I've never seen this before. I can't help you. Can't even help a fourth grader with its fourth grade math homework. Stupid, dumb daddy.
The legislature might have repealed Common Core as a term, but they renamed it. So right now people think we don't have Common Core. We do, it's just under a new name.
You're talking about the minds, the souls of your children. Don't play around with that.
I really just want to get parents involved and informed because I didn't know this stuff. That child is my child. God gave me that child. And for the government to think that it is their responsibility to take care of that child is just unimaginable.
All right, Sheri, that's an impactful little trailer, you'd call it, of a broader message. I think people just watch that, they have an image, they have a perception of what's taking place. Again, the title is Truth and Lies in American Education, but from your own words, what would you describe to be the primary message of that documentary? And follow that up with, if someone watches that, what is the challenge to the parent who watches that? What hope do you give them or challenge do you give them at the end of that documentary?
So the documentary is centered on educating not just parents, but freedom-loving Americans to understand what is happening in government schools. And so we have an all-star cast of experts, including Alex Newman, who you saw featured in the trailer, and Sam Sorbo was in that trailer. And they expose from their area of expertise what they've learned and written about and we've witnessed happening in the government schools. So it's really tragic. We see anti-American and anti-Christian propaganda. Children are being taught to hate their country, to hate themselves and hate others. And they're being sexualized. They're being groomed into gender dysphoria and other types of sexual behavior that the schools have no business teaching children. And it's gotten so bad that that's the reason we decided to create the film, to expose these things. Because if you go to your local school board meeting and talk about these things, they're going to deny it. They're going to say it's not happening. So we felt a strong need to expose what's happening. And also there's another effort toward trying to control the economy that is being forced on states by the federal government. It's all a scheme, and it's an evil scheme. And we understand that it is a battle between good and evil. It is definitely a spiritual battle. So we hope that the film will motivate parents to get involved and help us to stop what's happening. But number one, the first thing we suggest to parents is to get their kids out. I mean, Alex Newman says it like this. He says, get your kids out like the building's on fire. It is that serious. The government schools are damaging children. What's happening is it's akin to child abuse. And you have to protect your children. It is your responsibility given to you by God to protect your children. And if you don't get them out, they can be damaged, serious damage for life. And beyond that, the reason I said not just parents, freedom-loving Americans need to understand that the critical Marxist theories that are being taught that are turning children against their country and teaching them that communism is cool, it will undermine our very freedom. We will lose our freedom in this country if we don't end what's happening in these government schools.
Well, Sheri, in reality, I have said often what you just said. If we don't do something soon, we will lose our freedom. But I changed that, as I know you have also changed. And that is this: we are losing our freedom. As a matter of fact, we have already lost much of our freedom because we have not already stepped up. I think, Sheri, one of the things that is a concern to me is that these kinds of things like you are doing, your warning in that documentary, what we do on this program, highlight headline news, biblical responses, and our radio program, Stand in the Gap Today, we do the same thing. It's the idea that people are often lulled to sleep and think, well, I've got a long time to make a decision. Maybe a generation from now, but not realizing that we are the generation that are already showing the impact. And that brings what your message saying forefront, which is why we wanted to deal with it today. We have an issue yesterday, not tomorrow. And that's what United States Parents Involved in Education is trying to communicate. So ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We're going to come back in just a little bit and we'll conclude with some thoughts on this part one of this series of re-engaging parents, parental autonomy in the education of their children. We'll be back in just a moment.
Stand in the Gap is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. You can view our in-house studio productions on demand, or watch what's on the station right now with our 24/7 live stream. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device, or go to our website, lighthousetv.org, for more information. Lighthouse TV, positively different.
So, Sheri, as we kind of wrap things up in this segment here, could you sort of summarize what we've been talking about today as we look at, the God-given responsibility to parents, and that this affects not just parents, but any God-fearing person, anybody that wants to see things done right, that we need to be encouraging families, encouraging parents. And again, I think most parents would say, I love my children and I'm trying to do what's best for them. I think a lot of the folks I know in public schools, teachers and everyone say, oh, I love children, I love families, I would love to see parents involved in their kids' education. But there's this disconnect of truly understanding that it is the right and the responsibility of the parents, and that different things can come together to help them as tools, but it is ultimately the parent needs to be in charge of that autonomy. Can you just kind of summarize that for maybe somebody who's listening who they've never thought through it this way before?
Yes, well, so I think it's important, in the trailer, what Sam Sorbo says about the schools driving a wedge between the parent and the child. And so, beyond the misinformation that they're being taught, there is this move affront to separate parents from their children. And that can be devastating to a family. And, we hear statistics about children that are raised in Christian homes that, go off to college and they walk away from their faith. And that's not just because of the college, it's because of what they've been taught in the K-12 government schools leading up to that point. So it happened with one of my own children. I hate that I left my kids in the government schools. I saw what was happening. I thought I wouldn't have a voice if I didn't keep them there. And unfortunately, one of my children walked away from their faith, and he was very strong in his faith. And today, I'm still believing God for his salvation. But this is the kind of thing that you have to be concerned about and recognize that if with that responsibility, you have to make choices for what's in the best interest of your child. And the government schools are certainly not in the best interest of any child. We never recommend any parent leave their kids in the government schools. We have to find alternatives. And our organization has a lot of resources on our website that can help guide parents in these choices. And we have some good policy ideas that we're working on. And so we're working hard to not only educate parents and sound the alarm about what's happening, but also providing resources for them so that they can be able to make these alternative choices that are in the best interest of their children.
Sheri, thank you so much. That's a great summary, and it's great to have you on this program today. We're at the end. I'm going to conclude in just a moment, but ladies and gentlemen, we will continue this next week, so come back and join us again for part 2, where we will further build this out. I'm going to build out a little bit where the idea of parents' rights come from. I'm going to define that. I think you'll find the definition of what it used to be to what it is today to be quite informative. But I hope that you have been motivated as a parent or even a grandparent. The education of our children, God-given, our duty, cannot be given away to anyone else. No one more responsible than the parent. And grandparents, yes, of which I am one, and most of you, maybe many of you listening are, our responsibility does extend even to our grandchildren. So we must remain involved. God lays out the standard. He lays out what ought to be. The closer we get in alignment with what He says, the better everything works out. Thanks for watching us today. Let us know that you appreciate this program. Pray for us, partner with us financially as well.